some of Trump's actions and policies could contribute to the destabilization of social cohesiveness and the liberal world order, and all sides must play a constructive role in bridging the misunderstanding that contributes to the increase in fear and prejudice and uncertainty. Now, just to go a bit about the understanding of Islamophobia in the global context. The Rector has mentioned the Runnymede Trust report. We have it there. And of course, the Council on American Islamic Relations also says that Islamophobia is close-minded prejudice against or hatred of Islam and Muslims. So I take it that when you talk about Trumpophobia, it's essentially the opposite, which is in some ways close-minded prejudice against Mr. Trump. Now, of course, anti-Muslim attitudes have particularly spiked after the 9/11 attacks. And as we've heard earlier, it exists till today. But there are some examples that sometimes even Sikh Americans in America who are not Muslims, but they're also targets of people who are against Islam. So they suffer in that sense. The unfortunate case of Indians who were shot in Kansas recently. The shooter apparently thought that they were Muslims, and one of the things they said was, "Get out of my country, because you are Muslims." But apparently they were not. Now, Islamophobia, of course, is not a new phenomenon, and it has existed in the West for an extended period of time. If you look at France, Islamophobia dates back at least to the 1992 Algerian coup, where this occurred after the elections, and then there were violence in Algeria, and somehow there was arising from, I suppose, the colonial experience of France in Algeria itself. This spiked up in France, and we have people like Jean-Marie Le Pen, and now, of course, this legacy is being carried forward by his daughter, Marine Le Pen. In Australia, we had Paula Hanson, and of course, subsequently, there is this gentleman called Danny Nalaya. Mind you, he's not white Australian, he's of Indian origin. And he has founded the Rise Up Australia Party in 2011 to oppose the spread of Islam in Australia. And of course, we know the famous Mr. Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, who has been anti-Muslim or anti-Islam with his Freedom Party for a long time. He considers Islam as a religion that has to be fought with by Europeans. Now, but if you go back to the Middle Ages, we think about the Crusades, we think about what happened in Spain, we think about the days of the Ottoman Empire. I served as ambassador, as mentioned. I served as ambassador in Bosnia and Herzegovina immediately after the war ended in the 1990s. And the stories that I heard there, not only about that recent war, but about what happened previously during the Second World War and even before that, was quite scary. The war in Bosnia in 1992 was precipitated by a statement made by Slobodan Milosevic in 1989. This was to celebrate the 600th year of the defeat of the Serbs against the Ottomans in a place called Kosovo, Polje. Mind you, this was probably the only people who celebrated a defeat, not a victory. And Slobodan Milosevic used this as a pretext to wage, not just to wage war against the Muslims in Bosnia, but basically to try and assert Serb dominance over Yugoslavia. As you know, by that time, after the death of Tito, Yugoslavia was actually breaking up. So, anyway, That's what happened. There was a lot of anti-Muslim hatred, in a way, arising out of that war. And of course, when we talk about violence in that war, it worked both ways. I went to places where I could see mosques being destroyed at the same time, the Catholic Church razed to the ground. At the same time, in the same town, the Serb Orthodox Church was just remained as stones. But what was pretty obvious was that you hear of incidents like Srebrenica, you hear of incidents like Gorazde, you hear about the mosque in Banja Luka, for example, being demolished, and the stones, the rocks and the stones of this 400, 500-year-old mosque was loaded into garbage trucks and brought to a dump site. That was how the hatred was built up during those days. But anyway, just another point about this is, I just raised the question, is why is Turkey not accepted in the EU, despite more than 30 years of negotiations with the European Union? I will not give the answer to that, but I just posed that particular question. I'll go next. If you look at the situation here, when we talk about terrorist attacks, for example, there have been instances. This is a map that shows the various terrorist attacks. But if you look at it, really, in terms of the population, yeah. For example, the population of France, more than 7% of the population of France are Muslims. Yeah. These are the other countries in Europe, which shows that the various percentages of Muslims there. And if you look at this particular slide, for example, Islam in Europe, perception of Islam. In Spain, the total Muslim population in Spain is only 2% Muslim. Yeah? But the perception there is that 60% of the respondents who are asked think that Islam is not compatible with the West. 60% of Spaniards. And I think partly this is because of the history of Islam in Spain. And if you go down, for example, if you take Britain, where nearly 50%, about 45% of the people think that Islam is not compatible with the West, whereas the Muslim population in Britain is only 5%. Now, if you look at here, Islamophobia, of course, has flourished in the West for several reasons. I may not go into them. Association with terrorism is one of those things. Misperceptions of the West overrun by Muslims and Islam. There is also the belief that Islam is incompatible with Western society. But then if you look at Islamophobia itself, it's not just exclusive to the West. It is not a monopoly of the Western population. If you look at India, just to give you an example, Yogi Adityanath was appointed as chief minister and continues to lead the BJP in Uttar Pradesh. And we know the history of the BJP in India. These are people, this particular person, for example, has been reported to have said that he wants to place idols in every mosque in that particular state in India. He has his followers saying that they're going to dig up Muslim graves and rape the bodies of women, things like that. We also have a situation in China which is very interesting. The Muslims in China are trying to get halal food regulations being put in place, but there's a lot of opposition from academics, from so-called civil society and individuals in China, because they think that this will lead to the spread of Islam and will lead to radicalization. in China. Mind you, China has got 1.4 billion people and probably just less than 100 million Muslims, and yet there is the fear. Just because of halal certification, they think that it's going to radicalize the whole society. Next. If you look at Islamophobia in the West, if you look at past American presidents, they have actually been trying to go to great lengths to assuage national sentiments of Islamophobia. And they've been rejecting any suggestions of the correlation between Islam or Muslims with terrorism. Although, as we know, that in the context of the war in Iraq, for example, President Bush at one time said that this was a crusade. Yeah, and then he was reminded about it, and it sort of died down. But you remember that in 2001, 1 week after the 9/11 incident, Mr. Bush said this, that the face of terror is not the true face of Islam. That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace. These terrorists don't represent peace. They represent evil and war. That was 2001. But of course, in 2003, Mr. Bush decided to invade Iraq. Now, if you look at President Obama, he attempted to bridge the West and the Muslim world. We remember his speeches in Cairo, his speeches in Indonesia, and his refusal to use the term Islamic terrorism. And you remember that Mr. Obama was probably the only person who got the Nobel Peace Prize for what he said and not what he did. So, but the trend continues. If you look at American attitudes towards Islam, in October of 2001, according to the ABC News poll, 39% of Americans are unfavorable when thinking about Muslim religion for a moment. The question was, thinking about Muslim religion for a moment, would you say you have a generally favorable or unfavorable opinion of Islam? So in 2001, it was 39% unfavorable. In August of 2011, it was 61%. In November 2015, in 2011 it was 67%, and 2015, 61%. Now the unfavorable views towards Muslims remain entrenched and are particularly fueled by the association of Islam with terrorism. And of course there are several firebrand politicians who continue to talk about this, and also largely because of a lack of comprehension about Islam and Muslims in general. Now, next. Since 2015, it appears that the trend has worsened since then. If you look at number of high-profile terrorist attacks in the West and Europe in particular, the Charlie Hebdo case, the Paris massacre in November, and of course, the San Bernardino shooting. So, according to the New York Times, there were 257 reports of assaults, attacks on mosques, and other hate crimes against Muslims in 2015. This is a jump of about 67% over 2014. And firebrand politicians can easily tap into this fear to garner a huge following by the population. But let us be clear that Islamophobia did not originate from Trump, but he has undoubtedly contributed to its escalation among Americans. If you look at it here, there are 15 anti-Muslim hate crimes that were recorded within 5 days following Trump's statement on San Bernardino. The Council of American Islamic Relations disclosed that 32 anti-mosque incidents were reported as of March 2017. And the Southern Poverty Law Center reports that over 30 cases of anti-Muslim incidents were reported within 5 days after the 2016 election. So, in a way, President Trump has helped to move the latent and persistent displeasure towards Islam and Muslims to the center of US decision making. And this is very clearly demonstrated by the action that he has taken, or the executive order that he has issued regarding the ban on Muslims. So the question here is, should Muslims and immigrants therefore fear President Trump and his administration? So we'll try to look at that. First, if you look at several developments here, they do indicate that Trump is concerned to the Muslim community. Reason one, the Muslim ban. We know the executive order, which has also already been mentioned, and the Democrats and the civil society, civil liberties groups have labeled these orders as a thinly veiled ban against Muslims, although it says only initially these are the countries, and then of course Iraq was taken out. You see, Trump did not pursue blanket ban. No ban for Saudi Arabia, no ban for Malaysia or Indonesia. Perhaps because Saudi Arabia is considered as an ally in the fight against radical Islamic terrorism, and perhaps because there are business connections or interests in Malaysia and Indonesia. And we think that Trump also lacks a deep and nuanced understanding of Islam. And this decision is more likely influenced by the so-called pragmatic imperative to satisfy his voters. Because as you can see, many of the executive orders on the Muslim ban, executive order, latest one on the environment and all that, is essentially to fulfill the campaign promises. Of course, on Obamacare, also to fulfill the campaign promise, but he has failed also on that one. Next. If you look at the term, the emerging term, Trumphobia, we have some very interesting development here, the reasons. Reason two, sidelining of the experts and the empowerment of Islamophobia industry is what we call it. We have people here like Steve Bannon, the principal advisor in the White House or chief strategist. Bannon has said things like he believes that the Judeo-Christian West is at war with radical Islamic terrorism. Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, he has a long-standing anti-Muslim, he is against anti-Muslim organizations and individuals. Of his ties, he has got ties with anti-Muslim organizations and individuals, and he is also well known in Congress for his anti-immigration views. You have Stephen Miller, Senior Policy Advisor, protege of the former aide to Jeff Sessions. He drafted both the orders on Muslim ban. The Deputy National Security Advisor, Sebastian Gorka, he believes that Islam is inherently at odds with Western ideas and values. So these are people in the key positions in the White House who appear to be openly Islamophobic individuals. So these are the people who will help set the agenda for the Trump presidency. They will shape the ideology. They will probably be in the center of formulating policies. However, we have individuals like General McMaster. We have Rex Tillerson, who is the Secretary of State, and General Mattis, who is the Secretary of Defense, whose influence has been somewhat marginalized at the moment. Now, for example, Mattis has made some recommendations to appoint undersecretaries but this has been vetoed. MacArthur has attempted to clean up the NSC, but his attempts have been blocked. Tillerson has not got a deputy secretary as yet, and he has, and of course, the budget for his State Department has been cut by 28%. So this shows that they're not giving that much emphasis to the Secretary of State as well as the State Department. But this has yet to be seen, because Congress will have a say eventually in the way the budget is finally approved. So these are the people who are seen as people who can moderate Trump and provide professional expertise, but somehow they have been sidelined. Therefore, it remains to be seen whether they will be able to exercise their authority for the future. Next, reason number 3, mainstreaming of fringe woke abuse and the empowerment of ethno-nationalist extremists. So you have people like this who give views such as, we can't restore our civilization with somebody else's babies. This gentleman who shot the Indians said, get out of my country. And this person, Richard Leslie Lloyd, he set a shop on fire in Florida and said, he did this to run the Arabs out of our country. Yeah? There's also, this is recorded in November 2016, where someone said, hail Trump, hail our people, hail victory. And during this particular occasion, a number of the people in the audience were seen to be offering Nazi salutes. So we don't know whether this is actually a revival of the neo-Nazi movement in the United States. But we know that there are people who are sympathetic to the neo-Nazi movements in Europe. So these actions and languages are undoubtedly anti-immigrant and anti-Islam. Such articulations of prejudice have emerged from both elite and grassroots levels, and this presents a viable security challenge in the nation's stability and security. But as we know, there are people, including officials in the United States, who are fighting this phenomenon. We know of such things as sanctuary states or sanctuary cities, where they are giving support to immigrants, be they Muslims or non-Muslims. And Jeff Sessions has recently threatened to withdraw federal funds from those sanctuary cities and states. Sorry. Next, we say that trumping global peace, societal breakdown. Mr. Trump has said during his campaign of victory speech that it's time for America to bind all wounds of division, and I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. But his action over the last 60 days or so has shown that that is really not the case. He has actually quite done the contrary in terms of not uniting the nation, but still dividing the nation in various actions that he has taken. What has he done so far? He has empowered certain groups of people that were previously considered to be on the fringes of society. His lack of enthusiasm in denouncing or distancing himself from the support of extremist groups, and lack of condemnation of the occurrences of crimes against minorities, but will play out other criminal ongoings in countries such as radical Islamic terrorism. So what do we see? We see increase in hate crimes, we see lack of confidence in Trump and his administration, we see lack of trust among communities. Next, we see Trump's policies as threatening to disrupt global order as we know it. What are these policies? Free trade is out. Protectionism is in. He's talked about America first, make in America, buy American. He has decided not to pursue the TPP. He's talking about bilateral trade arrangements with individual countries. because he claims that America has suffered from other countries free riding on its economic benevolence. One of those countries is, I believe, China, but it's yet to be seen because the president of China is supposed to be visiting the United States next month to have a summit with Trump. Then there is the question of undermining international law. Trump's Muslim ban can be seen as a violation of the Geneva Convention on Refugees 1951. The multilateral cooperation may suffer. There are budget cuts to UN programs, budget cuts on foreign aid, as I mentioned, 20% cut for the State Department, dwindling global environment cooperation. I believe he's just signed the executive order on the environment, which in a way takes the United States away from the commitments that they've made under the various international agreements on the environment. And there's uncertainty about security and US leadership. Then the next one is the erosion of liberal values and commitment to human rights. The immigration ban can be seen as a violation of human rights, especially Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The potential withdrawal of the UN, of the US from the UN Council of Human Rights is also there. Now, so what does this mean for the rest of the world? We see it this way: as pros, possible reforms to keep US membership and get more funding could strengthen international institutions. If you remember that in the days of Reagan, they decided to withdraw from UNESCO, and they pressed for reform in UNESCO, and reforms were actually made in the UN bodies. So this could happen. But if you look at the contrast to that, would be that this would set the precedent for other states to flout rules on human rights and violate human rights, and also rules on the environment. And there's also a possible erosion of global open economy trade wars that could affect global prosperity, and there's also unpredictability of US action. Next, so we see here that Trump is the perfect enemy to Daesh. There are four reasons. One is both are steering the inter-civilizational narrative towards the clash of civilization mission. Daesh certainly hopes that the fear and misunderstanding towards Trump could radicalize people in the United States and elsewhere. Trump's erratic and impulsive behavior could potentially undermine US influence abroad and lead to its displacement as a global superpower. I don't actually quite believe that, because I think the US will remain the number one superpower for a long time, because China has a lot of catching up to do. China may be able to catch up economically, but militarily, obviously China is not up to it yet. And fourth, Trump might be expediting the realization of Daesh's vision of the final battle by pledging to send more troops to Syria. As we know, one of these propaganda for Daesh is this false hadith which says that when they fight 80 nations in Sham, then that'll be the end of the world, and they will all go to Vienna. Now, so we see here that Trump, unfortunately, knowingly or inadvertently, is running the risk of planting the seeds of radicalism through actions that appear to marginalize Muslims, especially in America. Trump needs to realize that his rhetoric and actions, intentionally or not, are supplying oil to the flame of Daesh's campaign. And as the man himself appears to have little understanding of Islam and terrorism, sustained efforts must be mounted on elite and grassroots level to help Trump realize that he is actually misdirecting his attention. Now we see that if left unchecked, the steps that Trump is taking might continue to be exploited by extremist groups. But the US is also beginning to make mistakes. For example, I believe yesterday there was a bombing in Syria where they killed more than 100 civilians. So that's going to create unnecessary problems for them. So, hope, checks and balances. Director Stizalha talked about checks and balances in the US system. Of course, there is sustained pushback by various institutions against Trump. I mentioned the sanctuary cities and so on and so forth. But you have in the American system where you have the executive, legislative, and judiciary, and we have seen some of the actions that have been taken. The Muslim ban, for example, executive order was acted upon by the courts in America. The civil society have been against it. And of course, the legislative branch is also looking into things like connections with Russia and so on, although they are having their own problems within the Congress itself. The latest being that the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, which is doing the inquiry, is being questioned himself as to his actions vis-a-vis the White House. So we see that things like the federal judge blocks Trump's new travel ban and so on and so forth. Therefore, it is not that clear-cut or not that simple or easy for Mr. Trump to simply promote his policies against so-called radical Islamic terrorism. So if you look at silver linings elsewhere around the world, although we have these people like Paula Hansen, Marine Le Pen, Geert Wilders, and so on, we know that Geert Wilders, for example, couldn't win the elections in the Netherlands outright recently. So, in a way, his policies have not been particularly appealing to the people in the Netherlands. Next, the clash of civilizations myth. Now, are we rushing towards the clash of civilization or not? Of course, there are some people who think we are, but certainly we are not, I think. And the problem with Mr. Trump, as we can see it, is, again, lack of nuanced understanding of Islam and terrorism, which has led to his misinformed policies and unwise rhetoric. Similarly, Muslims are easily put off by Trump's outrageous behavior, and therefore, in conclusion, there's a two-way understanding. There's a two-way misunderstanding between Muslims and Islam. So if we talk about Islamophobia on one hand and Trumpophobia on the other hand, what is clearly needed here is understanding, not misunderstanding. So without sincere and consistent attempts to understand each other, the relationship between the two would spiral downwards towards hostility and open conflict. So the gap between the two sides can and must be bridged. So how do we do this? We think that Muslims must engage Trump in a peaceful manner. So we don't have the luxury of not making any attempt to understand Trump, because the fact of the matter is that he will remain in the White House. If everything goes well for him, he will remain in the White House for the next 4 years. If not, maybe in the next few months or a couple of years or so. But the point that I think we should be looking at is that in moving forward, it is better to engage Trump peacefully than to remain in denial and respond with violence. Quran says that God commanded Musa and Harun to speak gentle words to Pharaoh instead of using violence as a response. Yeah, this from Taha. Now, 2 entry points for Muslims to engage Trump. One is his pragmatism, the other one is his understanding or misunderstanding of Islam. Now, let's look at it this way. Trump's business-minded pragmatism can be exploited by Muslim lobbies to make the offers that he cannot refuse, such as business opportunities and initiatives to improve community relations. The other thing is that Trump's perceived lack of scholarly knowledge on Islam means his current unfriendly attitude towards Muslims is not fixed and can still be altered, provided that we are willing to educate him on the true nature of Islam. Next, what can Malaysia offer to Trump's administration? We think that as a moderate Muslim nation, and we have Dato' Nasha there, promoting moderation, as a moderate Muslim nation, Malaysia can potentially play a leading role in cooperating with the US in addressing the issues surrounding Trumpphobia and Islamophobia. So what can we do? We can reactivate the campaign for moderation in foreign policy, because somehow it seems to have been lost in terms of momentum following the end of Malaysia's tenure on this UN Security Council. It's still not too late, or we can still do a lot on that. We can establish government cooperation with the US on counter-terrorism efforts. We're doing so, but we can increase that, certainly. We use regional platforms such as the East Asia Summit to foster dialogue and cooperation on these issues. We hope that Mr. Trump will come to the East Asia Summit at the end of this year in Manila. We can, for example, host forums such as a forum in collaboration with the UN Alliance of Civilizations. This is an international platform aimed to bridge the gap of misunderstanding between different societies. This was established way back in the early 2000s. I recall being involved in the discussions on this matter in the year 2004, 2005 in New York, myself. And avoiding sensationalism and preventing the planning of fear and hatred towards Trump and the United States. Lastly, I would say that the fear of Trump is an inappropriate response to maintain the stability of inter-community relations inside and outside the United States, because it somehow motivates small-minded people to commit violence against the establishment. The two-way understanding with Trump and the Muslims must be bridged in order to prevent the clash of civilizations mindset from taking roots in both the Trump administration as well as in the grassroots level, not only in the United States, in Europe, but also elsewhere. The predicament regarding Trump presents a perfect imperative and opportunity for Muslims worldwide to play a more active role in bridging relations with the West. I would like to end here actually with a quote which says, "Misunderstanding breeds fear, fear moves hatred, and hatred begets violence." This is actually something that was thought of by Muhammad Sinatra, an analyst at ISIS Malaysia. And by the way, Sinatra is also an alumnus of IIUM. And with that, I thank you that this presentation has been done with the valuable assistance of the following: Latifah Azlan, Malina Anwar, Naufal, Fauzi, Muhammad Sinatra. By the way, now they are over there, and Naufal is also an alumnus of IIUM. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Rustam, for this very interesting discussion and very comprehensive one. I think we move to the next speaker. The next speaker will be Dr. Khairil Zamin Ahmed. He is currently the head of the Department of Political Science and assistant professor in political science at International Islamic University in Malaysia, where he teaches courses specializing in political theory. And also he gave a presentation on the topic of the relationship between Islam and freedom for massive open online course, MOOC, titled Propaganda and Ideology in Everyday Life, on the Future Learning platform, which is co-hosted by the British Library and University of Nottingham, UK. And also is exploring the question of whether in Malaysia, following the idea of Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe, the impossibility of constructing a society is the very condition of its possibility. It's an interesting approach. So without further delay, I'd like Dr. Khairil to present his speech.
Thank you very much, Prof. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to our distinguished guests, His Excellency the Ambassador of Sudan, Prof. Datuk Sri Rector, representatives of embassies. Thank you very much, and also thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this symposium. I think Tan Sri Rastam has done quite a lot of groundwork in trying to set out what we'll be talking about today, and in fact also the rector's speech earlier has given us a lot, especially in terms of how to understand Islamophobia. There was a genealogical analysis of the concept, and I'm very grateful for that. What I'll be focusing on is on some general ideological issues surrounding the rise of Donald Trump, first as a presidential candidate in the United States, and of course after that, and currently as the president of the United States. I think for most of us, the image of Trump goes beyond just being a presidential candidate or even a president. I have a vivid memory of Donald Trump. One of the most enduring American entertainment in Malaysia is actually the world's wrestling entertainment. And my most vivid memory of Trump was when he appeared for quite a number of episodes of this wrestling, WWE wrestling, as playing an adversary of the chairman of WWE, Vince McMahon. And I remember clearly the end of his time in this show was that he got his head shaved bald because he lost a bet with McMahon. And of course today, as we all know, McMahon's wife, Linda McMahon, is part of Trump's cabinet. She's small business secretary, recently appointed. So there is the image of Trump as a celebrity. Also, of course, he was in The Apprentice, this very popular TV show, which was then replicated around the world, including in the UK and many other European countries. And there's the image of the insurgent politician, Donald Trump, when he emerged out of almost nowhere, and slowly he rose to become a front runner from the Republican side, and then won the nomination to become the Republican Party's presidential candidate, and later beat Hillary Clinton. So many of us are perhaps transfixed with all these images. His behavior was peculiar as a candidate within his party even. But here we are with Trump as president. What I'd like to put forward here is an argument that perhaps a lot of this transfixation, as put by Tan Sri Rastam earlier, sensationalism, could be overshadowing what really needs to be done in responding to a wider context of our global political discourse. It's not only about Donald Trump as the president, but it's also about the trend in global politics that is indeed shaping towards sentiments, politics, and even policies which are very much defined by right-wing populism. So that's where I'm coming